Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, again, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What is the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you in your own home? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. One morning, I was going about my usual routine, and I noticed some odd things in the kitchen. A blanket was in a spot I didn't remember putting it. Some papers were stacked, and I didn't remember stacking them. I don't think much of it. I walked upstairs to my office, calling to my cat to get him to follow me, when I was struck by an overwhelming, terrible feeling that something was wrong. I'd walked by a box that had been moved. One of my cat's toys was in the wrong spot. I could see through the doorway that there was stuff in the room I hadn't put there. There was a pink wig sitting on the floor. There was a sex toy in there. Someone had been in my house while I was sleeping. Someone might still be in my house. I spent the next 5 minutes walking back downstairs in the slowest, most paranoid way possible, feeling almost certain that some crazed rapist was going to jump out of a closet and F me up. Thankfully, no one was there. I discovered I'd left the back door unlocked the previous night. Nothing of significant value was taken. They just left some weird shit behind and organized a bunch of stuff. Cops think it was a random meth head trying doorknobs considering the lack of valuables taken. The fixation on organizing stuff and the sex stuff spent the next couple months obsessively checking to make sure my doors were locked every night. Boy, if I had a nickel for every time a meth head broke into my house and left a sex toy and a pink wig, I'd probably play a game of Pac-Man. Was temporarily staying at my parents' home. My dad was away, so it was just me and my mom in the house. During the night, around 3 a.m. I woke up. I knew something had woken up, but I didn't know what. I sat in the dark for a bit, straining my eyes, when I heard a wailing noise. It sounded like an animal, definitely not human, so at first I assumed it was coming from outside, but I realized it was coming from downstairs. What the F was that? I got up and crept out onto the landing. The wailing continued much closer now. Still did not sound like anything I had heard before. I stood on the landing at the top of the stairs for a full minute, wanting to do anything but go downstairs. Eventually I had to, so I did. First thing I noticed as I got downstairs was the cold night breeze and that the front door was wide open. Nothing there. The wailing was coming from the kitchen. I peered in the dark and saw the source of the noise. A tall figure, definitely a man, definitely not my dad. He was wailing like I had never heard in my life from a person, and I hope I never hear it again. The level of despair was animalistic. When I turned on the light, I saw it was our close family friend. I was baffled. Turned out, his daughter, my childhood friend, had died unexpectedly, and he had just found out. His immediate thought was to come to our house for support. My mom was actually outside with his son. The whole experience is lasered into my memory. It took me a while to not seize up whenever I heard a wailing noise after that. It was so chilling. It's pretty crazy how quickly something could go from freaky and supernatural to just heartbreaking, so I'm sorry. I live in my childhood home now. There's an unmarked grave on part of the land. We only know it is a grave because my uncle confirmed it by digging there many years prior to my parents purchasing the property. It's very old, no missing story here. It was common here for some families to lay their family members to rest on their property hundreds plus years ago. Anyways, I never knew about the grave as a child, but I used to hear crying at night often. I thought it was my younger sister, but when I was about 9 or so, I got up to go to the bathroom to see what was wrong. When I got there, she was sound asleep, so I left her room and heard the crying again, and turned around and saw what was behind me. It didn't really register that she didn't open the door or how she got behind me so quickly, but I asked her what was wrong, and she looked so shocked. Then she was gone. I opened her door again, and she was still sleeping. It wasn't my sister. I told my parents about it in the morning, and my mom cried and didn't want to hear any more about it. Dad said it must have been a dream. When I was older, Dad and I were talking, and I asked him if I remembered that dream I had, and I told him it really didn't feel like a dream, it was so clear. And he told me that him and Mom used to hear a little girl crying for her mommy and saw her several times. Mom was too spooked about it and didn't like to talk about it. He told me about the grave and that he really didn't know anymore. It was just a sad thing and made him question a lot of beliefs. Since living here as an adult, I haven't seen her around. I like to think she's moved on, but last Halloween my kids carved pumpkins and we used battery-powered candles instead of real candles, and the candles were removed and placed in the backyard at night. The pumpkins seemed untouched. We live very rural with only 2 neighbors. who were very elderly, so not much explanation for that. Before I tell the story, I need to explain a few things. I'm in a wheelchair, and the layout of the parts of the house in the story. The original 4-room house was built around 1890-1900 with wooden floors and soaring ceilings. A previous owner built an extension at the back, adding a small bathroom, entrance room, and an extra bedroom with tile floors. I went to feed my Indian ringnecks in their aviary and went back into the house. Going through the door, I had to turn around to close either the security gate or the door, which took all of 2 seconds. As I turned around, 2 men were standing at my door I had just come through. They started getting verbal but not physically threatening. At one point, they forced me to move back so they could get in. One slammed his flat hand into my chest and asked, "How are you?" to accomplish it. Naturally, I moved out of the way, and they stepped forward. As they walked into the house, only about 1 or 2 steps, they glanced into the kitchen to their left. My mom and our housekeeper were in the kitchen, with the housekeeper on her knees polishing the wood floors. They glanced at the housekeeper, turned around, and left without a word. All I could get out was, "What do you want?" They vanished around the corner, so I locked the gate and went to ask my mom, "Didn't you notice any of that?" The response was, "Any of what?" I told her, and the housekeeper what happened right under their noses, and that's when the shock hit me. Left me rattled for a few days. Afterwards, we called the neighborhood watch, and they could track footprints to where the intruders entered and left the yard. The only logical explanation I have for their sudden departure is that they recognized the housekeeper so she could point them out in a lineup. Whatever squad of guardian angels watched my back that day did an outstanding job. I'm thankful every moment since that, except for that one who slammed a hand into my chest. They didn't physically threaten me. I was at my mother's house and the doorbell rang. A young kid around 8 years old was at the door. I was opening the door and my brother was behind me, being curious who it was. The kid froze up, like he wasn't expecting me and my brother there, and there were 2 men in their mid to late 20s hiding on each side of the door. They booked it immediately after we opened the door. Luckily, my brother and I were there to open the door instead of my mom. I figured they wanted to rob her. I moved back in after that. One night when I was about 11 and home alone, an intense thunder and lightning storm developed. During a loud clap of thunder and brilliant lightning flash, it illuminated the entire 2-story house. I heard a spooky sound simultaneous with the thunder. Seems that one of the chains that holds the heavy weights on the grandfather clock in the foyer broke, allowing the weight to whack the dong and bang the pendulum as it crashed into the bottom of the clock case. At that point, I was convinced that something evil was lurking in the house, so I stayed in my room, cowering with the door locked until my parents finally returned home. When I was in my teens, my family rented this beautiful house. It was huge. It was 2 stories. Upstairs, it had 3 bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen, sunroom, lounge room. The downstairs, it had a second lounge room, a laundry, and behind the stairs on the bottom floor, it had a little walkway that leads to 2 doors. One door would take you into the garage. The other door led to an old abandoned dark room and what appeared to be an abandoned bedroom. It was directly on the dirt. There was no flooring and a smashed up bed. I hated the bottom story of that house. Every time you would walk down the stairs, it felt like there was someone watching you from the walkway. It felt angry, ominous, and threatening. It was terrifying. I actively avoided going down the stairs, but occasionally you'd be in the lounge room upstairs and you'd feel the same presence watching you from the top of the staircase. The man that owned the house was in a nursing home with dementia, and his daughter was handling renting the property. Weirdly enough, the old man died one day, and all the weird presence went away too. We discussed it years later, and as it turns out, everyone in the house had similar experiences. I don't know if it was real, but it was scary. Me and my wife rented a nice little single-wide mobile home in a clearing in the woods, well away from any other homes, nice and quiet. Until one night we were awakened by someone banging on the door just outside the bedroom. I was sure that whoever it was wanted us to know that they meant business. Shortly after we moved into the place, a van came up our driveway in broad daylight, backed up to our place, and fired 4 shots into our little place, and then sped away. There was no back door that I could sneak out of and surprise whoever it was. Both doors being on the front of the place, I got a powerful flashlight and a baseball bat. Why didn't I own a shotgun? I flung the front sliding glass door open, trying to be ready for whoever was banging at the other door. Just about 12 feet away, to my utter shock, there was no one at the other door. But still the banging persisted. I don't believe in ghosts, so I was really scared now. Seeing that there was no one at the door, I figured I could go and around the back of our mobile home and try to see why someone was banging on the thin aluminum back door. But they were invisible. I was really terrified by the time I got around the end of the place, where I quite closed the door. The banging had stopped, then started up again while I had my light on the door and the few wood steps leading up to the door. Then I got curious enough to take a closer look. Down below the wood steps, a skunk had got stuck between the plywood backing behind the back of the steps and the sheet aluminum skirting under the place. With only a couple inches of space, the skunk was kicking at the aluminum skirting, which echoed up through the aluminum door above the steps. I had to pull the steps away from the skirting to allow the skunk to depart in peace. Supernatural or not, a loud sound in the middle of the night in a rural area will freak you out, and then having it being a skunk could make it even worse. Glad it worked out. My husband is a sleepwalker talker, and he has a recurring dream that there's a portal to another dimension in the corner of our bedroom. He will wake up and say, "Look, it's right there," all the while being asleep. While I believe 100% there is no portal, it's still creepy. I was awakened around 3 a.m. by my dog barking frantically. I went to find him, and he was standing in the kitchen, outside the door leading to the basement. I peered through the window, top of the door, and didn't see anything, but he was going crazy, jumping against the door. I managed to open the door, go through and close it again quickly, so he couldn't get out. I flipped on the light and tried the door handle that led to the back patio. It was still locked, which made me feel somewhat better. So I slowly crept down the stairs, barefoot and wearing only a t-shirt, and flipped on the light at the foot of the stairway. 2 masked pair of round eyes stared up at me. I froze. There was one large, overfed raccoon sitting on top of a dresser, eating cat food from a bowl I kept there for my cat. A smaller raccoon watched me from atop a bookcase. I realized that I must have forgotten to put the panel in the doggy door that led outside, and these guys decided to come in and investigate. What I did next came naturally, but people have told me since that was a rather foolish. I clapped my hands and shouted, "Out! Get out now!" While I was still standing at the foot of the stairs, both coons jumped down from their perches and obediently climbed back up the stairs and exited through the doggy door. Shaking like a leaf, I pushed the panel back into the opening and never again left it out after dark. About 9 years ago, I was home on summer break, and it was my habit to stay up late browsing online many nights. I live in a small suburb, so there's not much local traffic at night. One particular night, I was at my computer as usual watching YouTube around 1 in the morning, hopefully our channel. There was heavy rain outside and high wind, so tree branches were bumping into the side of the house from time to time. I was at my desk, which was about 15 feet away from the front door, when I heard a soft thump against the door. I figured it was just the wind blowing a branch against the house, so I ignored it. A few seconds afterwards, there was a very heavy thud against the front door. At that point, I realized that it was not, in fact, the wind at all, and dashed upstairs to alert my dad something was going on. I looked out the front window, down at the front step, and didn't see anything. So about 10 minutes later, I opened the door to see suitcases on the front step. Our family had returned from a trip to a different state about 2 weeks prior, and the airline had misplaced the luggage after the return flight. Apparently they had found the luggage and decided to drop it off at 1 a.m. in a heavy rainstorm. Definitely alarming when it happened, but non-creepy in the end.